podcast foi gravado com o Dr. Rupert Darwall. Ele escreveu dois livros muito interessantes, The Age of Global Warming, a History, e The Green Tyranny, Exposing the Totalitarian Roots of the Climate Industrial Complex, ou Tirania Verde, expondo as raízes totalitárias do complexo industrial climático. Ele nos leva até a Alemanha nazista, passa pela Suécia, os atores envolvidos, a escola de Frankfurt e como é que a esquerda sai de defender a classe operária para defender o meio ambiente e excluir a classe operária dos seus empregos, do seu trabalho, deixar ela com uma conta de luz mais alta. E também a gente gostaria de deixar claro aqui que nós não somos a favor de destruição do meio ambiente, nem nada, muito pelo contrário. Como os conservadores, a gente gosta de conservar o meio ambiente, né? Conservar as nossas águas, o nosso ar. A questão é que essas políticas implementadas, por exemplo, a política de energia eólica, ela não é limpa, como dizem. Ela precisa de uma grande área para ser colocada. As áreas florestais da Europa estão sendo devastadas, em especial topos de montanhas, por exemplo, onde você tem que tirar a floresta e colocar esses cataventos que produzem essa energia. Você precisa produzir esses cataventos e precisa de carvão gigantesco, uma energia de carvão gigantesco para fazer todo esse aço envolvido. Mineração que envolve terras raras, por exemplo. Você precisa transportar esses equipamentos da China até lá. Esses equipamentos têm uma vida útil 20, 25, 30 anos, depois você precisa retirá-los ou refazê-los. Você tem, como todo equipamento, você tem óleo, você tem contaminação de solo, você tem essas turbinas matam milhões, se não bilhões de aves todos os anos e morcegos. Então, a questão é saber se essas políticas, se esse direcionamento político para onde a energia vem, se ela não é pior para o meio ambiente do que o uso de outras fontes de energia como hidráulica ou mesmo combustíveis fósseis ou como do fracking, que hoje é uma revolução que emite muito pouca CO2 comparando, por exemplo, com o próprio carvão ou com o petróleo. Então, aproveitem a entrevista do Dr. Rupert, que é muitíssimo interessante. E não esqueçam de inscrever nos nossos canais. Okay, we're back to the DaniPod. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Rupert Darwall. He has written extensively for publications on both sides of the Atlantic, including The Spectator, Wall Street Journal, National Review, and Daily Telegraph. He writes for RealClearEnergy.org. He's author of the books The Age of Global Warming, A History, and Green Tyranny, Exposing the Totalitarian Roots of the Climate Industrial Complex. Welcome to the DaniPod, Rupert.
Thrilled to be joining you, Daniel.
Oh, it's good to have you here. You know, I love the way you write, the way you put together the political, historical, even psychological aspects of everything, especially in relation to climate change and global warming. Not too many things are capable of doing that. I can remember only of Thomas Sowell, who can write about so many aspects of one thing and put it so clearly.
Thank you, sir.
Well, your book changed my mind about the green movement and the climate industrial complex. In your book, you describe the genesis of the movement and its totalitarian roots. First of all, what is the climate industrial complex?
Climate industrial complex embodies, first of all the scientists, the huge scientific enterprise of academics and climate scientists who basically live off government grants to take this forward. Then there are the green rent seekers, so investors in wind farms and solar and so forth. Then there are all the consultants that all hang around that, and you've got their helpers in the media, and then they pull in the politicians. So it's a vast and accretive enterprise, if you like, and it's got an institutional apparatus in the form of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It has a secretariat, it has a conference of the parties, big COPs, once a year. It has lots of subsidiary meetings that happen through the year. Then you've got the intergovernmental panel on climate change. They have lots of meetings. So there's a vast institutional apparatus that kind of holds it all together.
All right, we'll come back to that later on. But how can we trace the roots of the modern environmental policies to German Nazi?
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult subject in a way. I mean, difficult. It's not technically difficult, but it's a big issue in my mind. And it's this, Daniel. If you look at the policies and the philosophy of the National Socialist Party, Hitler's party in the 1920s and 1930s, it is incontrovertible that they were Europe's first Greens, the first to take power in any government in Europe. And the policies they pursued were green policies. Not exclusively, they did lots of other things that weren't green, like wage war and the Holocaust and so forth. But their environmentalism was very much part of the Nazi ideology. And it was basically saying that industrialization was bad. We need to preserve woodlands. We need to go back to the forest and to find our true selves. That they passed ordinances to preserve woodlands. They were anti-vivisection. They were into homeopathy. I mean, there wasn't a green thing that they didn't pursue, even to the extent that they were in favor of wind farms. They wanted to build lots of wind farms, and there was a project with Nazi engineers to develop wind farms. They talked about having a hydrogen economy, just as happens now. What do you do when the wind's blowing and people aren't drawing down power? Well, you use that spare electricity to create hydrogen. So they actually were talking about a hydrogen economy in the 1930s. It's absolutely extraordinary.
And there is something embedded in German culture about environmentalism. And what happened what are the links between former Nazis and socialists on the green movement? You explain that a little bit a lot in your book.
Yeah, I think this is again a really important point. What happened in West Germany after the Second World War? I mean, Germany had been completely defeated in the war. A bit of it was taken over by the Russians, and then you had West Germany, which was very, very strongly aligned, not just politically with the United States, but culturally with the United States. And for the first 30 years of the Bundesrepublik, it was a very stable, if you like, very pro-Western, very pro-American, and very sort of pragmatic state. And then in the 1970s, well, first of all, you had the 1968 student revolution, and you had the Frankfurt School of post-Marxist people, and the most famous one now is Herbert Marcuse. And they were, if you like, the prophets of the student radicals. Some of these student radicals actually became terrorists, and Bader Meinhof and so forth. And a group of them hijacked a Lufthansa plane, and again, the link with the Nazi period is that these German terrorists they segregated the Jewish and Israeli passengers, and they were holding them hostage, and they were going to kill them before they were rescued. So some of them became effectively, they became terrorists, real live terrorists, and ghastly people. Others in their circle then were the future leaders of the Greens. And in the 1970s, after the terrorist stuff died down, because the West German state basically crushed it, the government wanted to build they had a large nuclear power program, and that set off spontaneous anti-nuclear demonstrations. And from that, you saw the emergence of the Green Party. And the Green Party was formed not just of these 1968ers far leftist radicals, but also former Nazis and neo-Nazis all joined to form the Green Party in early 1980. And from the 1980, from then on, through the 1980s into 1990s, you had the growth of the Greens until they joined with Schröder when he won. He defeated Helmut Kohl and became German Chancellor. There was a red-green coalition, and the Greens, the former 68ers, actually took power. And the rise of the Greens permanently changed German politics. It pushed German politics leftwards. It also turned German politics green, dark green, and also European politics, because Germany is the most important state in Europe. Its impact was to change, if you like, to color Europe, the EU green.
And during the 60s and 70s, can you say that there was Soviet disinformation within West Germany politics? What can you say about Petra Kelly and Bastian, who were linked to the Green Movement at the time?
Yeah, I mean, her lover, Petra Kelly's lover, was actually he was actually a Stasi agent, and the East German regime, the East German communist regime, in the 1970s came to a recognition that West Germany had won the economic race, that capitalism beat socialism. So you therefore had two things happened. First of all, you had a sort of ideological shift, which is that East German communist Marxist intellectuals decided, well, they kind of went green. So they started producing sort of green tracts, and why capitalism wasn't destroying the working class, capitalism was destroying the planet, kind of thing. So you had that shift. And you also had the East German regime backing the Greens in West Germany to undermine the West German economy and the West German government. So it was, if you like, it was a sort of intelligence operation and also an ideological one.
And there is a story in your book, I think it's about a protest in 67 or 68, that a German person or a student was shot, and that shot was made by a police, and that police was an Stasi agent in the West Germany.
That's right. I can't remember the name of the student who was shot. He was very famous, and it was like a seismic event in West German politics. This shooting of this student, and it turned out decades later, it was found that this West Berlin policeman was actually a Stasi agent. Speaks for itself, really, doesn't it?
Speaks for itself, yeah. Can you tell us who Joschka Fischer was, and why should we know about him?
Yeah, Joschka Fischer was one of the 68ers, and he was part of the Frankfurt Circle that was extreme left, extreme radical, and rejected what was then the West German constitution, West German system of government. They were known as the extra parliamentary opposition. So they opposed what they saw as this capitalist regime. They wouldn't go into parliament. They opposed the whole setup. He knew these people who became terrorists. I think he spent one night in a police cell, and he had an epiphany, and he decided terrorism wasn't the way forward. And therefore he embraced more peaceful means. And when he and Danny Cohn-Bendit, who's a very important figure in all this, saw the emergence of the anti-nuclear movement, they decided this was their chance to get back into their vehicle to get power in Germany. And
what is the role of Angela Merkel with the Green Agenda? And what what happened to the energy sector in Germany after Merkel implemented those green policies in Germany?
Yeah, I think Merkel is, and the thing to know about Merkel is that not only was her father part of the East German communist establishment, that she was very pro as the communist establishment of the DDR, in that she made 2 visits to West Germany when Germany was divided and had the Iron Curtain running down the middle of the country. She made 2 visits to West Germany, and because she had no children who could be kept hostage, as it were, if she fled, she was trusted by the regime, and so she's someone who knew how to operate within a totalitarian state, and knew how to get on in a totalitarian state. It was then when the Berlin Wall fell, she joined the CDU, and she quickly became part of Helmut Kohl's government. She was environment minister, and in fact, she was the German environment minister who was president of the first UN environment conference, climate conference, after the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. And so she was right. She's been in this story almost right from the beginning, from the early 90s onwards.
I want to talk a little bit about Sweden and acid rain. The acid rain scare. I went to a German school here in Brazil, and at the time I was there, I remember clear that the professors, our teachers, were talking about acid rain. I was a children, and I remember going out and feeling that the rain, and was worried that the acid would make something to me. They were telling us. I know they were simply replicating what the German media was telling them. But is that scare, that acid rain scare, real? Was it real? Why did it start? What relation does it have to Sweden?
Why it was started? So what happened in the late 1960s? The Swedish government, like the West German government wanted to do in the 1970s, the Swedish government, Social Democrat government, wanted to build a fleet of nuclear power stations. Sweden, unlike most European countries, has no coal of its own, and it has quite good hydro, a bit like Brazil. It's got quite a lot of hydro, but it needed more energy. It needed more electricity to generate more electricity. So the Swedish government said, well, we want to have nuclear power, and the problem was that there was a lot of popular opposition to nuclear power in Sweden. And so what the government did was the Social Democrats said, well, we've got to tell people, if we don't have nuclear, we're going to have coal. And if we have coal, 2 things will happen. The first one is that the acid rain will fall from the skies, and it will pollute our lakes and destroy our forests. And then, in fact, 2 or 3 years later, they came up with global warming as well. And it was all part of a political strategy, a political strategy to persuade ordinary Swedes that they must accept nuclear power. And interestingly, the first government report on acid rain was written by someone called Bert Berlin, Bolin, who later became the first chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. But he made his appearance, if you like, his debut appearance was actually on the acid rain scare, as it turned out to be, and then he moved on to global warming.
And what is the science of acid rain? Is it really does it make lakes and sea acid? Did it make it acid at the time?
Well, what happened was that the acid rain scare, as I say, it started in Sweden, and it was started by the Swedish government. And what they did was that they then wanted to hold the convene a UN conference on the environment, which happened in Stockholm in 1972. And out of that became a UN treaty on convention on acid rain, transboundary pollution, it was called. And there was Canada then took it up, and the Canadians complained the whole time to the United States, you're poisoning our lakes and forests. And so the Americans set up a panel of scientists to look at this. And that was done in the early 70s, and in the late 70s. And then 10 years later, the panel reported, and it found that contrary to what the Swedes and everyone else thought about acid rain, the reason why lakes had turned acidic wasn't to do with power stations. To give you an example, the state with the highest number of acidified lakes was Florida, which is not downwind of any coal power stations. And what they found was that lakes for example, the Adirondacks in New York State had become acidified, not through air pollution, but through what had happened was in the late 19th century, you had the lumber trade come in, they cut down wood, they burnt tree stumps. And the effect of that was to reduce the acidity of the natural acidity of those lakes. Then the conservationists came in and said, oh no, you mustn't cut down trees and so forth. So the forests returned to what they were before, and the lakes re-acidified. Okay. So this was just entirely natural. But the unfortunate thing was, by the time this scientific report came out, the United States Congress and the first President Bush had all decided that acid rain was the biggest environmental threat to the United States, and blah, 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 and they passed the Clean Air Act amendments, which introduced cap and trade for sulfur dioxide emissions from coal-fired power stations. So the legislation had been done. Unfortunately, there was this inconvenient report that basically said what you're doing is a complete waste of time, because the power stations didn't cause the lakes to become acidified. So
they approved the law even though they knew it was a fraud. The science behind it.
What was worse is the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, actually suppressed this report, and they got the scientists to rewrite it. And if you read this report, virtually every single report you read from a government on the environment has a summary for policymakers, it has key messages, at the front, so you don't have to read the rest of it. Didn't have anything like that, because the summary would have been too toxic for the politicians. So you actually have to read the whole damn thing to find out what the science actually says. Which is, and the science says it. Yes, you're right, Daniel. Basically, the scientists have got it. The alarmist scientists on acid rain have got it completely wrong.
And you mentioned Marcuse and the Frankfurt School. Can you walk us through a little bit of the Frankfurt School influence in America and in Europe in relation to environmental issues?
Yeah, the Frankfurt School was a group it started in the 1920s, late 1920s, early 1930s in Germany. And it was a group of Jewish Marxist intellectuals. And they, in fact, it was private money. It was capitalist money that got them going, as with all these things. And when the Nazis came, they fled. They went first to. They fled Germany not because they were Jews, but because they were Marxists, which was intelligent of them. But they went first to Switzerland, then they went to New York. And they were in a way post-Marxist, because they understood that the proletariat wasn't going to behave as a class like Marx and Engels said and be the vanguard of the revolution. And therefore they developed this sort of cultural critique of capitalism, which is basically capitalism dupes the working class with into not realizing its class interests, and therefore it was kind of minorities and the marginalized, and they took up the environment as that capitalism, instead of oppressing the working class, was actually oppressing the environment. So they developed the idea of ecocide and so forth like that in the late 1960s. Unbelievably, the United States government paid for, or one of the big American foundations paid for the Frankfurt School to return to Frankfurt after the war, after the Second World War, and that's how it reestablished itself in Frankfurt and had a big influence on the 1968ers, who we just talked about. In the United States, they've had a colossal influence on American universities in terms of the deconstruction of and their cultural critique of America. I mean, they saw America as an emerging fascistic state. I mean, it's unbelievable stuff. They fled to America and then they denounced America as fascistic.
That's right. They polluted the universities in America and went back to Germany and did the same thing, I think.
Yeah.
What is the rationale behind them? What it's like a religion or an ideology that compromises the whole society. It's how does it relate environmentalism to Marxism and to German culture? How can we melt that down?
Well, the thing is about, if you like, the original Marxists, as in Marx and Engels, they were anti-environmentalists. For example, they were very anti-Malthusian. Thomas Malthus, the British economist, and he was also a reverend. He was a Church of England parson, and who believed that population growth would be subject to would trigger war, disease, pestilence, and so forth, and therefore populations would be crushed by these recurrent catastrophes, and therefore you need to control population growth. And Marx and Engels completely rejected this view. They actually believed in capitalism. They thought capitalism was this huge growth machine, and so they rejected it. And I think it was Engels called Malthusianism a blood libel on the working class. Now, the post-Marxist generation of the Frankfurt School completely rejected that. They called that workhouse Marxism, and instead they saw capitalism as destroying the environment, and that was their critique. Capitalism is destroying the planet, kind of thing. So that's where they came from. It was a useful way, because basically Marxism had been proven wrong economically. They therefore changed the whole debate into one about the environment.
Sometimes I think there is something about this new left that they want to do some kind of revenge against this working class, since they didn't revolt as Marx predicted, and they want to crush them with immigration, deindustrialization, and political correctness. Can we say that the left sold out the working class to West billionaires and to China?
Sorry, give me that. Has the left?
Can we say that the left sold out the working class, the West working class, to billionaires and to China?
Absolutely. So that is the big structural, if you like, a conflict or internal contradiction within today's left, is that the left of center parties grew as expression. They were there to defend and promote the economic interests of the working class, and now they've completely betrayed that, because they've gone into cultural Marxism and and all these fringe things that are completely contrary to not just the class interests of the working class, but also their culture and their beliefs and so forth. And that is the big, if you like, that the crisis of the left in the Western world. Absolutely right. Yeah.
And you say there is an expression from you, this is ethics for the wealthiest.
Oh,
What is that?
yes, yeah. I think environmentalism, because you see this with the super rich, that they say, well, I'm now working to save the planet. I'm using, if you're Bill Gates, I'm using all my wealth to sort of save the planet from global warming, or I'm investing in wind farms and solar, therefore I'm saving the planet. Or if you're Jeff Bezos, you say, well, I've just given $1 billion to, so it kind of, it's like your protection money. So the left can't attack you because you're saying, well, I'm saving the planet. And so I think in a way, this is the thing about environmentalism. Although I think environmentalism has been a much more successful ideology than old Marxism, because it has taken over the establishment. And although it's much more revolutionary in terms of the means of production, in terms of political structures, it just keeps them as they are. Therefore, Prince Charles, who's a hereditary prince, can embrace environmentalism because he knows it's no threat to the throne of England. But it's a huge threat to working people and to their livelihoods and to economic well-being. So it's something that's very comfortable for elites to believe in, because it represents no threat to established political structures.
What is
In that sense, it's genuinely counter-revolutionary. If you're thinking in terms of, if one's thinking like a Marxist, it is a counter-revolution.
What is undermining the Western values, isn't it?
Oh yes, it's doing that. It's hollowing them out. It's also, I think it's also, Daniel, I'll go further. It's making people stupid. We have the head of the British intelligence, counterintelligence service, MI6, said, well, our mission now is going to be to spy on countries to see if they're keeping their greenhouse gas commitments, emissions. I mean, ridiculous. I mean, you don't need a spying agency to tell you if that China is building huge numbers of new coal-fired power stations. But what it means is that if they're doing that, they're not doing their proper job, which only an intelligence agency can do. If you say that global warming is the biggest national security threat, you're not looking at the real ones.
That's right. And everybody wants to conserve nature, and all this stuff. But do the politics of environmentalism, wind power, solar power, is it sustainable? Is it carbon free? Will it save our energy needs?
Well, you've got this big problem within the environmental movement, which is, and I think in Green Tyranny, I said, we got the point that for the environmentalists to save the planet, we've got to destroy the planet, kind of thing. That American major in the Vietnam War who said to save the village, we had to destroy the village, because you're going to have hillsides covered in wind farms that kill birds of prey, that kill bats and so forth. You've got solar farms that have a horrible effect on water, and also just the aesthetic effect of turning over swathes of vast tracts of land to produce energy. And it's not just the solar panel that you have to mine. They're very material intensive. What you're doing is instead of using very highly efficient hydrocarbons of oil, coal, and natural gas, which are very energy dense and therefore very efficient, you're using very dilute energy. You're trying to catch from the wind and the sun, and to do that you need a vast amount of land. You also need a vast amount of materials, and you alluded to this. You need steel, you need concrete, you need aluminum, all this stuff. And for solar panels, you need a lot of rare earths. You need so you're going to be digging up, a lot of Africa is going to be dug up to make solar panels for the West. I mean, that's where, and batteries and so forth. So yes, the plundering of nature. So this is where environmentalism has given up on protecting the environment, because they basically sold out to the renewables industry. That's why Michael Moore's film from, was it not last year, the year before, for is so important, because that film points up to the complete contradiction at the heart of the modern environmental movement, which is why they hated him, why they hate him, and why they tried to get the film banned.
It was banned from YouTube, I think, and he's a left-winger, you know, and he couldn't say the truth. That's the problem. When you don't say the truth, the truth comes back to bite you. So can we say that climate science is corrupted by money and ideology right now? Is it too big to fail?
Oh, it is too big to fail. And they can't, the pressures to conform, the pressures to generate findings that conform to the narrative, the narrative of a planet heading towards a climate catastrophe is just too great. And, you know, science is about finding confounding evidence. It's finding evidence that conflicts with your suppositions, that falsifies what you, they're not into that. They're not into that at all. Not into that at all. So it's a self-perpetuating and self-affirming scientific. It's not really science anymore. It's just a tool of, it's a communications. It's about supporting this narrative that has swept the world now.
And why they are against fracking, which is a revolution in the energy sector?
Well, fracking was something that wasn't meant to happen, because we were meant to run out of oil and natural gas, and along came fracking, and it just changed it, but killed that argument. So from the environmentalists used to say the reason we've got to have wind and solar is because we're going to run out of oil and gas, and then along came fracking, and we found, you know, suddenly there was an abundance of oil and gas, and the price fell, and it was a nightmare. So you've had environmentalists have been waging a war against fracking, and they've done so successfully in Europe, where fracking has been banned. In Britain, it was Boris Johnson has banned fracking. In the United States, you've got the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, has banned fracking. The governor of California is trying to ban fracking in a desperate attempt to keep his job. Sort of last year. But so yes, the environmentalists, fracking is a nightmare for them. Joe Biden in the election said he wasn't going to outlaw fracking, but now he's come up with his net zero plan, which will involve the erasure of arguably America's most successful industry.
And it's amazing that big oil companies say that they will go green, but I don't know if there's something behind it, because, for instance, the price of oil just went straight up since Biden won the election, and they are profiting much more now than during this time that they are trying to ban fracking. Do you think there is something behind that they say they will go green, but they know that it is impossible for the US to go green? They need oil, and they will profit from them. And it's a kind of shield against political correctness also.
I think there's a difference between the American oil companies and the European oil companies. I think that the European oil companies have basically have bought the proposition that what they should do is run down their hydrocarbon assets and invest in wind and solar. Even though why they should be successful investors in wind and solar. I mean, the electrical industry is so different from oil and gas. It's although you think it's energy, it's actually so fundamentally different. The oil and gas industry brings nothing extra to. But so you've got the Europeans on that side. I think the American mindset is much more, as you described, that they basically know that oil is going to be oil for transportation is going to be needed, and if there's no way the world is going to move, the developing world as well is going to move to electric vehicles. It's just too expensive. Not going to happen. Not in the foreseeable future.
Well, Elon Musk is selling a lot of cars, saying that. I don't know if he's going to achieve. I don't think it is really possible.
He sells a lot of carbon credits. A lot of, I mean, he makes money selling credits to other automakers.
Oh,
That's part of the business model.
and Bitcoin now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There is a chapter in your book called The Spiral of Silence. What is that chapter about? Is there a philosophical connection between political correctness, multiculturalism, and the rise of the environmentalist movement?
The Spiral of Silence is the title of a book written by someone who was, it's Elisabeth Noelle Neumann, who was Germany's leading pollster in the Second World War. And her insight came that people don't tell pollsters how they're going to vote. So there was an election in, I think it was the 50s or 60s, where it was a surprise result, and that people don't tell the truth about what they really think. But she went further than that in The Spiral of Silence, and she said about how political and media elites can, with opinions they disagree with, they can, if you like, there is the spiral of silence, so that these beliefs don't get reported in the press. Therefore, people cease to be able to articulate. They don't have the words. First of all, they don't talk about them, and then they cease having the words to articulate them. So these beliefs just get pushed away to the margins of debate, and then they kind of disappear. And so that's what we're seeing with the climate change debate, because there isn't a debate, is there? There isn't
no debate. There
isn't a debate. And so what you're seeing is the workings of the spiral of silence. And that's what the climate change crowd understand. There shall be no debate. That's how they win. There shall be no debate. If there's a debate, they lose. They lose because substantively their case doesn't stack up. They lose also because then people will realize, it's okay to have a contrary view to what everyone else is saying, because other people are saying it. Therefore, I'm not alone in believing this.
For instance, you had the coldest April in 100 years in the UK right now, right?
99 years.
In 99 years. You had snow in Scotland this week, in May. Earlier this year, you had snow we had snow in the UK and in Australia at the same time. But people think that the planet is about to become a fireball, that we are going to die. My daughter, some years ago, came back from school and she was crying that the planet was going to end, and she was young and she wanted to live more. She was really scared. And for instance, I'm a British by heart. I love British history, culture. I love it. And after Brexit, I thought that the UK would be pursuing a new path, like maybe a Hong Kong or Japan in Europe. And you elected Boris. He was a hope for that, but you voted Conservative and you're getting the Green Party instead. Do you think that there will be a backlash against those policies? What will happen to the UK?
I think there will be a backlash to those policies, but it won't happen yet. I think that one of two things. It may be because there are blackouts at some point, and that electricity, even we've had much higher electricity bills, and that hasn't caused a backlash. But I think if there were a couple of blackouts because of that might change views. But the big thing will be when people, it's about how people heat their homes, because at the moment we rely on natural gas, on methane, and it's quite cheap. And what the government wants to do is to force people to use heat pumps, which cost a lot of money and cost 4 times as much to run. And at that point, the idea of people shivering in the cold and not being able to. So I think that's going to be a very big deal. But you're right. Essentially, I think the battle in Britain on the green stuff and on climate has been lost. There's no debate here. I think the United States is very different. I think that the United States is much more I think things can change. We've got Biden who's going for net zero, but in 2 years, in less than 2 years, there'll be midterm elections, and in 4 years there's another presidential election, and it could change very quickly there. But in Europe, and as you know, even though the UK has left the European Union, every single country has signed up to this stuff, and the elites all believe it. They all believe it.
It has become a tool of social control, climate change. It seems.
Yeah, yes. I think it has, in the sense that it's a very clever thing. We mentioned earlier that it's like a counter-revolution, in that if you want to keep the existing social and political hierarchies and structures, embrace climate change, because the climate change narrative is saying to young people who are actually going to be the biggest losers from climate change policies, because the hierarchy is saying to them, we're doing this for you. It's saying the older generation of the sinners, we've let you down, but we're doing our best now to purge ourselves of this crime. We're doing this for you. And it kind of, it turns the younger generation into victims. It elevates them morally. It gives them this stature. But what the younger generation don't realize is that they will pay the price, terrible price, for these policies. That it will take away economic opportunity. A lot of the things that the older generation have taken for granted are going to be denied to the younger generation, and they can't see that. They don't
pay the price with their pockets also, in many ways.
Yeah, as long as they've got their smartphones, are they going to be too upset? I don't know. But I'd say to you, you can say to your daughter, look, they said the same thing about global warming. They said about acid rain. When I was a kid, they told me that the forests were going to turn brown from the acid rain. It turned out to be wrong.
Now I convinced her. She understands that. I showed her your videos, some other videos. I told her to read some books, and she's on my side. She knows that.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Even if you complain that in the UK there is no debate, you cannot imagine in Brazil. There is not even. They may say you are a crazy man. What would you recommend to Brazil on these times? Because also they are selling us that the way out of COVID is by the green agenda everywhere in the world, and there is a lot of pressure in Brazil right now, because also that we have the first right-wing government ever, so they are trying to destroy the government here. What should we do?
I'll tell you, there was in my first book, there was this very interesting Brazilian who was, you can correct my pronunciation, he was ambassador to the United States and the UN, and he led Brazil's preparation for the 1972 Stockholm Conference. His name was Miguel Alvaro Osorio de Almeida, and he said, the problem to be solved, in fact, is not achieving an ecological balance, but on the contrary, obtaining the most efficient forms of long-term ecological imbalance. The problem is not to exterminate mankind now in the name of ecological equilibrium, but to prolong our ability to use natural resources for as long as possible. And that is the right kind of thinking. We don't want to see that the idea of ecological balance itself is a very, very problematic one. But if you look at how societies have, if you look at history, you can have confidence that carrying on as we are, rather than starving ourselves and completely tearing up everything we have, actually we're going to be okay. And look back at what they were saying in the early 1970s. They said in the early 1970s, you had scientists saying that modern industrial civilization would collapse within the lifetime of people then living. Well, how's that stand up? How's that stand up? So, have confidence in the failure of these prophecies. They've all been proven wrong. The ones that they've made these prophecies, they have not come to fruition. They've been negated.
None of them came true. The millions would starve. Right. The global cooling.
Yes.
Well, last question. If you could have anything from Brazil, what would you have?
Oh, your sunshine. um, I think Brazil was one of the 4 countries at the Copenhagen Climate Conference that said no to a climate treaty. And Brazil should have confidence that it should pursue its own development path. It should develop a successful economy. It's 49% of South America. It's got they're tremendously talented people with huge amounts of energy. And what Brazil shouldn't do is follow the West and follow Europe. Europe is this dying continent. It's a very pleasant place to live in a way, but and Brazil should say, we are going to be the future. We're not going to go down the path of senescence and into an old people's home. We're a young country. We're going to have a future.
We call ourselves the future. The Brazilian is the country of the future. We should keep that. I said that was the last question, but I have another one. We talked about the acid rain, but it was a fraud, and we know it, and people earn money or something regarding that. Someone was held accountable for that. And when this climate change, global warming scare passes, do you think there will be someone that will be held accountable for that?
I don't think anyone will be held accountable for it. I just think you mentioned acid rain, and what happened is people to this day still believe in acid rain. The difference with acid rain, there were 2 big differences with acid rain. First of all, they made predictions that were immediately falsifiable, in that the forests weren't being burnt by acid rain. So you could go out and see the forests and see that there was the other mistake. So that was their first mistake. The second one was that dealing with acid rain was comparatively inexpensive. You just fitted scrubbers to the chimney stacks of coal-fired power stations, whereas that was quite cheap to deal with. Whereas with global warming, you've got all the wind and solar and all these green rent seekers. So they've created a whole class a huge class of people with an interest in, and not just, it's coming back to the climate industrial complex. It's vast. They're not just going to turn around and give up, are they?
We're not having a real plus 50 with climate skeptics here saying, look, everything you said was wrong. It's not going to happen. So
yeah, well, if you are having anything in Rio, I'll come and see you, Rio. See you, Daniel. I'd love to come to Brazil again.
Please come. We welcome you here for sure.
I'd love to come.
Thank you very much, Rupert.
Thank you, Daniel.